Hello, my friends, and welcome back to Diverse Thinking, Different Learning. If you are new here, welcome. My name is Dr. Karen Wilson. Today, we're discussing how to support neurodivergent teens as they begin navigating dating and romantic relationships. Now, interest in connection and belonging is human and universal, yet many neurodivergent youth, particularly autistic young people, have fewer opportunities to develop those skills. Now, dating conversations can feel uncomfortable or uncertain for families, but avoiding them doesn't reduce the complexity. It increases vulnerability. And that's why I'm eager to bring this conversation to you all. And my guest today is Dr. Elina Veytsman. She's a clinical psychologist who currently serves as the director of training at the UCLA Peers Clinic, where she facilitates groups for neurodivergent preschoolers, adolescents, and young adults, as well as their parents and caregivers. She also conducts individualized peers with a limited number of clients through the Center for Pediatric Neuropsychology, a private practice in Los Angeles. Please join me in welcoming Dr. Veytsman to the podcast.
Millions of kids struggle with learning, processing, and social emotional difficulties. These challenges interfere with their ability to reach their full potential. Dr. Karen Wilson is here to help. Her extensive background in pediatric neuropsychology and higher education have prepared her for this unique mission. Listen as she delivers content to inform, educate, and empower parents and educators. This will enable you to identify challenges that kids face and get them on the road to achieving their full potential. This is Diverse Thinking, Different Learning by Child Nexus.
Dr. Veytsman, welcome.
Thank you so much. Thanks for having me.
I'm so glad you're here because we are talking about a topic that we have never talked about on the podcast, dating. So thank you so much for being willing to have this conversation with me.
Oh, I'm more than happy. It's my favorite to talk about.
Yes. And we're talking about dating specifically in neurodivergent youth. And it's just something that has come up. Parents have lots of questions about it. Young people have lots of questions about it. And there are some nuances when we're talking about neurodivergent youth and dating. And so, again, that's why I wanted to have this conversation. You were the perfect person because I know you've done a lot of work in this area. And some parents might be listening and thinking, like, how early do you see curiosity or interest in dating emerging?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, it can be as early as the teenage years. Oftentimes I work with young adults. So typically over, 17, 18 is when they are more interested in dating and the social demands sort of shift from friendships to romantic relationships. But teens as early as middle school might express interest in dating too. I do always say that you got to know how to be a good friend before you can be a good romantic partner. So we always start with friendship skills. Even for young adults, we start with friendship skills. A lot of the skills that are necessary for developing friendships are going to be also important for developing romantic relationships. So we always start with that. But
yes, that's such a great skill to start building early on.
Absolutely. Absolutely. I mean, think about for dating, you need to know how to have a good conversation, right? Just like for all your friendships. So it starts with the basics, the foundation.
Wonderful. And I know that there are a lot of misconceptions that you hear often about, particularly when we're talking about romantic relationships among autistic and neurodivergent youth.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
What are some of those misconceptions? Because I've heard many of them.
There are so many. One of the biggest myths, I think, is that autistic people, neurodivergent people just aren't interested in romantic relationships. They don't want to date. In reality, many of the teens and young adults that I work with, many neurodivergent individuals, deeply want connection and relationships, just like everyone else. May not have been taught the social roadmap that neurotypical teens often pick up on more informally, more naturally. And then I think another big misconception is if people are struggling socially, that they can't have healthy relationships. The reality is that social differences do not mean that someone can't be a thoughtful and loyal and loving, honest partner. It just means that dating skills might need to be explicitly taught, right? Things like assessing romantic interest or navigating relationship boundaries or knowing how to initiate conversations when online dating, right? You can think of it this way. We teach math, right? We teach driving. but we rarely teach dating. And for a lot of neurodivergent individuals, it's just not as intuitive, and they're learnable. These skills are learnable just like everything else.
Yes. And I often see parents interpreting a lack of outward expression as a lack of interest. Like you're talking about, that's a misconception that there's a lack of interest, when in reality, there may even be anxiety and processing differences, or even fewer social learning exposures that are leading to some of the outward expressions that they're seeing.
Absolutely. Yeah. I mean, if you're familiar with autism, you know that autistic individuals often struggle with social communication, right? That's kind of a feature of autism. But think about what that looks like in the context of dating, right? They might struggle with initiating and maintaining conversations. They often don't know what to talk about on a date, right? What do you think? What do you think autistic people will often talk about on a date?
Probably things that they're interested in.
Yeah. It's often their restricted interest. And the problem is it's often with very little regard for whether the other is interested in that. And it creates this one-sided conversation where they're either kind of taking over the conversation and not letting the other person talk. In the peers program where I work, I'm the director of training there. We call that being a conversation hog, right? When you just or they might ask a lot of questions because they've been told on the date, you need to ask questions. And they become almost like an interviewer, and they're not really sharing anything about themselves. And in both situations, it becomes this one-sided conversation where they're not really finding any common ground, right? And if your goal is to date and develop romantic relationships, what could be the problem with not finding any common interests?
Right. You just don't move forward, right? And it ends right there.
Exactly. I mean, that's what relationships are based on. And so if you're not finding common interests, you're not really getting to know them. And so in the Peers for Dating program at UCLA, we before we even get into any of the dating specific skills, we just teach how to have reciprocal conversations.
Right. And I'm glad that you brought that up, because there are specific challenges that autistic teens and young adults face when navigating dating and romantic relationships. And you've talked about a couple of them. Tell us about a little bit more.
Yeah. So one of the things that we see with the research shows about autistic individuals is that they tend to have fewer romantic relationships, even compared to individuals with other disabilities. They often also have less sexual knowledge, less sexual awareness, right? Think about that. Where do teens usually get their knowledge, their sexual knowledge from?
Probably from their peers.
Exactly. And if you don't have a lot of friends, then you're often getting it online, right? Is that a realistic representation of sex? Absolutely not, right? They also have a greater incidence of stalking behavior, some of our young adults. And that's an interesting one, right? Because if you think about the definition of stalking, it has to do with intimidating or threatening the other person. And that's really not what they're doing.
Not the intention, right?
But the intention is different from the impact, right? In fact, what it does relate to, the stalking behavior, is more a poor understanding of social cues and or even hyperfixation, right? A person can be a restricted interest too. So, that combined with a lack of knowledge of social cues can certainly lead to what is interpreted as stalking behavior. I'll give you an example. I had a young adult in my program who would go to Starbucks every day and had a crush on the barista. And she smiled back at him a few times. And, after he got that smile, he interpreted that as she was interested in him. And so he would sit there and stare at her with this big, toothy grin every day. And he found her on Facebook, and actually her Facebook had her other job listed, and he found the phone number for her other job, and he started calling her at her other job and showed up there. He was not trying to scare her at all or stalk her, right? His intentions were good, but it came from a positive place. But again, intention and impact can be two vastly different things, right? So I've had plenty of young adults in my groups who've had issues with stalking behavior, restraining orders. They're really not trying to hurt all. And then the other thing that we see a lot is that both, males and females on the autism spectrum are at risk for sexual and financial exploitation, victimization. They're often taken advantage of, right? I can't tell you how often parents will disclose in our groups that their teen or young adult has a history of being taken advantage of or exploited online. And oftentimes I'll speak to that young adult and they'll say, I didn't even realize it. I had no idea what was going on, and they were a romance scam, that they want connection. They're often lonely but they have difficulty with social awareness, and that often makes them an easy target.
Yeah. And it's interesting because in the assessment work that I do, I frequently notice these uneven profiles where you've got these strong cognitive reasoning skills, but then that's paired with lagging social awareness, which can contribute to this misunderstanding because other people would think, this is a person who's highly intelligent and is doing well in school and has all these great intentions. They wouldn't be at risk for falling into these, situations.
Right, exactly. A lot of our teens and adults are really smart. They have really high cognitive abilities, but they struggle with social cognition, right? They struggle with perspective taking, or theory of mind, or social thinking, as others call it. And so they don't always know how to predict what someone else might be thinking or feeling or experiencing. And it doesn't mean they don't have empathy. That often gets misunderstood in autism. People often mistakenly think that people on the spectrum don't have empathy. That's not true at all. There's actually two different kinds of empathy. One is affective empathy and one is cognitive. And affective is like feeling something, right? When another upset or sad, you feel something, right? But you may not know how to respond to it or talk about it or label those feelings. Cognitive is being able to identify and label that feeling in yourself and others. And out of those two, autistic people tend to struggle more with the cognitive empathy. So they don't have the feelings. They don't often know how to label or talk about them, right? But imagine how important that is for things like relationships or conflict resolution, right? To be able to label how another person is feeling and understand their perspectives and sort of reflect that back to them. The good news is, though, perspective taking and social cognition is kind of like a muscle. It's something that we can work on, we can build. And so that's something that we incorporate throughout our entire program. We ask a lot of perspective taking questions. What do you think that was like for that person? What do you think they thought of me in this situation? And are they going to want to see me or date me again? Right. And that can sort of build that social thinking.
Right. I'd love for you to talk more about that social cognition piece, because I imagine a lot of people listening are thinking, what's that? Because you're really speaking about specific skill gaps that we see in neurodivergent youth that actually present as challenges in dating contexts.
Yeah. And it's exactly what we've already sort of talked about with that. So the communication issues, the poor social cognition, those come up when you're dating, right? Imagine not being able to take another person's perspective, right? When you're into a disagreement with someone. And so that's why that needs to be incorporated from the very beginning. When we talk about conversational skills or when we talk about online dating, we talk about a lot of socially helpful and socially risky behavior. And after I describe each socially risky behavior, I might ask them, what do you think that might look like? So we really work on building those descriptive adjectives of, understanding exactly how I might be perceived by another person, what that might be like for them, how they might be feeling. So again, it's something that we can really, those skills are something that we can actually build on and will really contribute to, developing more meaningful relationships.
Right. And that's so helpful for families to know, because there are real risks that you've described. There are, autistic youth, neurodivergent youth, many of them are at increased risk for being taken advantage of. They're more vulnerable. And families want to know realistically, how do I prepare for this? What are some things that I can do? Because it's often parents I see swing between overprotection and then a total avoidance of the topic altogether.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. Yeah. I mean, so when it comes to being vulnerable to manipulation or exploitation, I think the issue is, or what this sort of looks like, is that a lot of autistic youth might sort of take people at their word, or they miss subtle red flags, or they struggle to detect things like love bombing, right? When someone's giving them these, grand gestures of affection, adoration early on in the relationship, feeling this intense excitement right away that someone's showing this romantic interest. And that combination can make them more vulnerable to things like catfishing, right? People lying about who they are online, financial exploitation, sexual coercion, also emotionally controlling partners, right? Toxic relationships. So I think the thing to keep in mind is that the vulnerability comes from a lack of experience and education, not from the autism itself. And so if someone hasn't been explicitly taught what an unhealthy behavior looks like, like pressure or guilt tripping or moving too fast, rushing the relationship, they may interpret that attention as genuine interest. Talk about all these red flags and these different, dating practices to avoid. And then another issue, something that families should prepare for, is that a lot of teens, young adults on the spectrum often miss signs of romantic interest. So they do someone who's not interested at all, and they miss the cues that that person isn't interested, right? Like like the Starbucks example I gave you, they perceive one smile as flirting, right? That might lead to social rejection or being perceived as creepy when the intent, really wasn't inappropriate at all. A lot of the young adults that we work with, they're not inappropriate, they're just inexperienced, right? And dating has these unspoken, unwritten rules that many people absorb intuitively. But our participants benefit from learning them explicitly. And then, of course, I just wanted to mention online dating because that's such a
Please do, because that's a big one.
I mean, so we all know people lie about who they are online all the time, right? And there's potential for romance scams, which, that's when someone pretends to be romantically interested to gain trust. And then they ask for money or financial help or sensitive information. So it's just really important for young adults and families to learn how to stay safe when online dating. So for example, talking about, never sending money to someone that they've met online, only sharing information or photos that they would be comfortable with anyone seeing. I always say, if you don't want your grandma to see it, if you don't want your boss to see it, don't ever send it to anyone through a text, through an email, online, right? That can be shared with anyone. Also things like meeting in public places, right? Not going to some, dark alley or some remote hiking trail for a first date. And then, of course, checking in with friends and family before and after dates, not accepting rides with dates at first, things like that.
Right. And again, it feels like the inexperience is really a key factor here that you've mentioned. And you've mentioned peers. For people who don't know about peers, and specifically the peers dating program, talk about that. And I love that it's a strength-based and it's neurodiversity respecting, and it's helpful in all of the things that you've identified that put neurodivergent youth at risk. And also it's skill building, which is empowering.
I mean, first of all, I just want people to know, before I talk about peers, that I want folks to know that feeling nervous about their child dating is completely understandable. But with some preparation and explicit teaching and coaching, which is what we do in peers, autistic youth can really experience healthy and meaningful romantic relationships. The risks that they face are not totally different from their peers. They just benefit more from explicit guidance and things that other teens might be learning informally, right? So when we teach skills in peers, like recognizing healthy versus unhealthy partners, or understanding consent, or handling rejection, online dating safety, we're actually reducing risk. So that support and education are really what protect our young people, right? It's not keeping them out of the dating world altogether. They're going to want to experience it at some point. So we have to support them and educate them. So just to give you a little bit more background about peers, it's a program that's been around for over 20 years. It was developed at UCLA. It started with a teen program and then expanded to adults and preschool. Now we have our dating program, our careers program. For dating, Peers for Dating, we just completed our second randomized controlled trial. So we're still analyzing data from that. So it's been a research program all this time. And actually, our very first educational group that's open to anyone is starting next week. So I think it might already be full, but as soon as one program ends, the next one begins. If people are interested in that, you can look up on UCLA Peers for Dating and email the Peers Clinic and ask about that. But basically, it's a program it's a 20-week program that meets once a week for once a week for an hour and a half. And the young adults meet in one group, and their parents, as we call them in Peers, social coaches, meet in a separate group at the same time. And I should mention, it's not all parents. So some young adults will come in with a peer mentor or a life coach or a sibling, really anyone that can support them and sort of these skills and generalizing them outside of the group. But I would say most of the time, 70% of the time, it's parents. They're meeting in two separate groups at the same time. And the young adults are learning all of these skills related to developing and maintaining romantic relationships. And the parents are learning how to become social coaches to them outside of the group. So I want to mention what you talked about, that it's a strengths-based, neurodiversity respecting approach. Absolutely. It's really important to note that this program is only appropriate for people who are socially motivated. So everyone who's in our program wants to be there. And that's really important to know, because we would never want to force social skills on anyone. It's completely voluntary. And, whether or not to participate in the program, and also whether or not to use the skills that we're teaching, is completely a personal choice that we want to be really clear about with our participants. Also, social skills sometimes gets a bad reputation. Often in the neurodiversity community, people talk about it leading to things like masking, that it's teaching them to not be their authentic selves. And I just want to address that briefly. So choosing to use social skills is not about changing a person. It's not about changing who you are. It's about enhancing someone's social interactions so that others can appreciate them for who they already are, right? If you think about it, a really easy example, we're all making choices all the time of whether or not to use social skills, even if we have them, choosing whether or not to use them. And if you've ever been in a Zoom meeting, you probably found yourself maintaining proper Zoom etiquette, right? You're not walking around doing your laundry, taking other calls, picking clothes, right? Cooking, looking at the screen, you're looking engaged, right? You're nodding your head. That's practicing social skills. And that's a choice that we're making, right? It doesn't change who you are as a person. You're just making a choice to do that in the service of something that's important to you. Maybe your job, for example, right? So you think about social skills, that's what it really is. We're making choices to do this in the service of something that's important to us. Maybe that's relationships, right? Maybe that's developing romantic relationships. So in peers, we really respect the role of neurodiversity. It's really just a different way of thinking, right? That's all. Personally, I think it's a wonderful way of thinking. I love working with neurodivergent individuals. They have so many strengths. And we also have to understand that not everything that we teach is going to work for everyone. And not everything that we teach will align with everyone's goals. So for example, we talk about making eye contact, right? Eye contact can let people know that you're interested in them. It serves the function of showing interest in a person. But it doesn't work for everyone, right? For some people, making eye contact feels painful, where they're distracted, they can't even listen to the conversation. So if it's not working for someone, don't force it. We can find another way to fulfill that same function. What are some other ways that we can show interest in someone? Maybe ask follow-up questions, maybe nod your head, right? So basically the idea is we're trying to help individuals figure out how to achieve their goals in a way that's authentic to them. We never want someone to feel like they have to change who they are. That's not okay, right? Because who they are is absolutely wonderful.
Right. And I feel like what you're describing is you're really helping them to expand their communication tools rather than modifying their identity. We're not changing their brain. We're just supporting their ability to navigate these situations in a way that feels comfortable for them.
That's exactly right. And this has always been the peers approach, but we've become a lot more explicit about it with our families because we want people to really understand where we're coming from in teaching these skills. So we've actually incorporated a neuro-affirming pledge into all of our sessions. And it's something that we show families every single week just to remind them. And basically it states that we value neurodiversity and acceptance and authenticity. And we really honor the diverse ways in which people experience the world and respect each person's unique communication styles and perspectives. And also we recognize that there's no one right way to connect with others. So if using these strategies taught in peers ever feels like camouflaging or masking, or if it's not aligned with your goals, you don't have to use them. It's completely a personal choice. And so we remind that to families at the end of, or at the beginning of every session, right? Again, it's really about giving them the tools to navigate the social world, not in any way taking away their identity.
And you've discussed kind of in our conversation some of the topics that are important. Are there skills that young people ask for support around, or topics that are discussed in peers that resonate with the young people?
Oh, yeah. There's a lot of questions around how to show romantic interest. Like, how do I let someone know that I'm interested? How do I compliment someone, right? Is there a way to flirt with my eyes? There are, by the way. We can talk about it. And a lot of questions around online dating. Like, how do I to create an online dating profile? How do I initiate contact with people when I'm online dating? How do I go from that to actually asking the person out, right? And how long are we supposed to be talking? These are questions that not just neurodivergent people have, by the way, right?
That's what I was thinking. I was thinking that I think everyone who has been in that dating pool has had these same questions, right?
100%. All my friends ask me all the time, can you please teach me what you teach in peers for dating? But yeah, I mean, we spend a lot of time in peers actually looking at people's dating profiles and giving them feedback on their, photos, their bio, and helping them initiate contact with people and maintain the conversation. So that's the kind of stuff we get asked about a lot of the time.
And I feel like rejection processing is important too, because it kind of incorporates emotional regulation, and then also integrating coping skills when rejection does occur.
Absolutely. Yeah. So we have a whole session on how to accept rejection when dating. Also how to turn someone down, right? If you're not, how do you turn someone down politely and maybe stay friends with them potentially, right? We have also sessions around navigating relationship boundaries and just general like healthy and helpful dating practices, including things like consent and safe sex as well.
Right. And I know that you talk about socially risky and then socially helpful behaviors. Can you talk about what that entails and how that kind of is incorporated into the peers and conversations you're having with young people?
Yeah. Basically, these behaviors are based on what are called ecologically valid skills, meaning we didn't make any of this stuff up. It's not what we think works,
right? Not our opinion.
Right. It's funny. If you ask the person who developed this program, initially, if you ask her, like, did she want to do dating skills? She said, absolutely not. It's like the blind leading the blind. We can't rely on our own knowledge or our own experience.
Right. No, not at all.
Right. So this is based on sociology, anthropology research of what are socially savvy people doing out there in the dating world. And then on top of that, focus groups. We've done a lot of focus groups with people, both neurodivergent and neurotypical people, about what are helpful and risky practices out there today, because they change all the time, right? So focus groups to know what online dating is looking like these days, right? And what's helpful and risky in an online dating profile. So I'll just give you a few examples of some of the behaviors that we teach. So for showing romantic interest, this is the big one that people ask about all the time, right? How do I flirt? Well, there's actually steps for how people flirt with their eyes, right? So you can imagine like you're at a bar or at a party or some social gathering and you see someone from across the room that you think is attractive and you might want to go up and talk to them, right? Well, oftentimes people will start showing interest by flirting with their eyes. You think about the steps involved in that. You start by, what do you do first if you want to show someone that you're interested? Let's see if you can get it.
So you're looking at them.
And then what do you do? You make eye contact and
then you might smile.
You smile. Is it like
right.
a huge toothy grin?
No, it's not. It's absolutely not.
It's not a huge toothy grin. It's like a slight smile. Do you keep staring at them at that point? Or do you maybe?
No, you don't. You disengage. Right. Mm-hmm.
Is one time of looking at someone and making eye contact and smiling, is one time enough? Is that flirting? Or do you need to maybe repeat this process?
You're going to repeat the process.
You repeat the process. Exactly. So those are sort of the steps involved in flirting with your eyes. You make eye contact, give a slight smile, no, big toothy grin. You look away and you repeat. And of course, you're assessing their interest. Are they doing the same thing? And if not, abort the mission, right? That's how you flirt with your eyes. There's also flirting with words. Flirting with words involves giving compliments, different types of compliments that people might give. So if it's someone that you don't know very well, we tend to want to give more specific compliments, right? So rather than saying, you're so beautiful, or you're so smart, or you're so funny, we say things like, you have really pretty eyes, or you have a really nice smile, or wow, that was really interesting, that story that you told. That feels a lot more genuine, right, than giving more generic kind of general compliments. General compliments are saved for people that you know really well, right? Also, if let's say you're on a date, the person's making a joke, you don't really think it's that funny, but you want to show interest in them, what are you supposed to do? Maybe you smile and say that's funny, or you give a little courtesy laugh, right? A courtesy laugh is something we all kind of naturally do sometimes when our friend or romantic partner tells a joke. We don't think it's that funny. Not like a sensitive joke, but you can tell they meant to be funny and you want to make them feel comfortable, right? And you want to show that you're interested. So we actually practice in our groups how to give a courtesy laugh when someone else tells a joke.
So not the big belly laugh, right? The courtesy laugh, right?
Well, role play demonstrations, right? Video role play demonstrations. And in the risky example, the courtesy laugh is over the top, where the person, it's like a big belly laugh and the person's slapping their knee and waving their hair. It's like a whole thing. And it just goes over the top and not genuine, right? It's a more subtle, kind of casual. And if people don't feel like laughing on command, nodding and saying that's funny and smiling, it does the same thing, right? It's just showing them that you're interested. It's making them feel comfortable. But, the least risky way, by the way, to show romantic interest in someone is just to trade information. And that's the term that we use for a good conversation, right? When you're having a good back and forth conversation, you're kind of trading information. You're sharing about yourself, they're sharing about themselves, and finding common interests, right? So doing things like asking open-ended questions and follow-up questions and listening and sharing the conversation. That's the least risky way to let someone know that you're romantically interested in them. So that's one example. I can give you one more example because people want to know about online dating profiles. So let's think about profile pictures for online dating profiles. Let's think about some risky profile pictures. How about mirror selfies or workout pics? What do we think about that?
That's a no.
You seem vain. You seem like you're showing off.
Right.
Things like avatars or Snapchat filters or animated filters, pics that hide your face. That's risky too, right? They want to know who you are. They don't want to be surprised when they meet you in person. Another one that we see all the time, cropping someone out.
Oh, okay. Yes. There was someone else in that picture. Right.
Cropped out your ex, right? Or posting any pictures that appear to be a romantic partner, even if it's your brother, right? You have to state who that person is then, right? Because if it could be perceived as a romantic partner, that's risky. People think you're posting your photo with your boyfriend or girlfriend or your partner, right? And then for bios, one of the biggest mistakes people make is being negative in their bio, what they don't want. I would never date someone like this, right? Or sharing dating history, sharing personal things in their dating profile. Instead, the profiles need to stay positive, focused on what you do want or what you're looking for in a partner relationship. And the most important thing you can do in your profile is to highlight your interests in your photos and bios. Because what that does is it creates conversational bids. It basically makes it easy for people to talk to you. Because now they can comment on something in your photo. Oh, did you travel to Italy? Oh, you play the guitar? Oh, you're a surfer too, right? It makes it easier to initiate a conversation. And similarly, when initiating contact with people online, we never want to start with something like, hey, what's up? Or hi, how's it going? That seems like a copy paste, right? It's generic. Or like a you're gorgeous, right? Like, again, not going to get a lot of responses if you do that. Instead, you want to start with a comment, question, or compliment that is specific to something in the person's photos or bios. That you are putting in the thought, the effort, right? You've actually looked at their profile, and you're going to be more likely to be successful that way and get a response from the other person.
Right. I feel like this is such great information for young people, things that they may have thought about or have already experienced struggles navigating. And one of the interesting things about peers, and I think people have heard from your description, is that caregivers are involved. And can you talk a little bit about how they're involved in the process? Because again, I think you talked about being social coaches for them, for young people.
Right. That's one of the unique aspects of peers, is that we include caregivers, social coaches, in every single one of our programs. If you think about that, we all sort of have natural social coaches in our regular lives. These are the people that you run ideas off of. Maybe you're dating and you're asking your friends like, ooh, what do you think of this text? You put a period at the end. What is that? What should I wear to the second date? Or where should I plan for, our second or third date? We're always asking people for feedback. We don't want them to have to see us forever, right? We want to train someone else, teach someone else to help generalize the skills to the real world so that they can continue coaching on these skills long after they've left our program. That's one of the things that contributes to the positive outcomes that we see in our long-term studies of peers, right? We see that even 1 to 5 years after the program, people are continuing to benefit and actually doing even better oftentimes because to practice the skills and get coaching in the real world, right? So basically the job of the coaches, and again, these are often parents, but can be someone else, also another person that's close to the teen or young adult. Their main job is to practice the skills outside of the group and to provide social coaching in the real world, right? So maybe, they notice their young adult having a conversation with someone and they give them feedback afterwards on, I noticed that you did a really great job finding common interest there. And you asked some really good follow-up questions. Maybe next time try to share the conversation a little bit more and be careful not to be a conversation hog, right? But great job. So we teach them how to give we teach them specific strategies for how to provide social coaching through things like praise, using, buzzwords that we teach in the program, and also through prompting as needed, through priming, so preparing them in advance before going on a date or before going to a social event. And also how to provide corrective feedback using a praise sandwich, as we call it. So without it seeming punitive, because when people are learning new skills, you want to keep their motivation high, frustration low, and encourage them, right? And so oftentimes people are used to giving a lot of constructive feedback, and it might be discouraging. So we're teaching them how to provide that feedback in a way that young adults may be more receptive to. And then, of course, encouraging their young adults to complete weekly homework assignments that we give in peers. That can be things like calling another group member in the beginning, right? Just to practice conversational skills. Or later on, it's things like practicing flirting, right? Or practicing giving compliments. And not all young adults are going to want to practice that with their parent. And that's why we definitely welcome them to come with a different social coach or to identify another person that they can practice with outside of the group too. And then another main job of the coach is to involve young adults in social activities where they can potentially meet romantic partners with common interests. So it's not only online dating, right? People often meet through social activities, recreational activities, classes, right? That's where people often make friends and meet romantic partners, because you're likely involved in something based on your interests, where you're likely to meet other people with common interests. So you have kind of a built-in common ground there to connect on.
Wonderful. And so when you have young people who go through the peers program, and I know you are all collecting data, what benefits are you seeing to people who participate in peers dating? Because I know that's, what young people and their caregivers and people who love them and care about them and want them to have these meaningful relationships want to see.
Yeah, of course. So if you haven't heard about peers, it's one of the only evidence-based social skills programs, meaning there's a lot of research out there to show that it's really effective in helping people make and keep friends and develop relationships. And we actually have over 75 scientific papers published on the program, and they're all available on the UCLA Peers website for free. So you don't have to go looking for them. They're all there if you're interested in that. But in terms of dating, the dating program, like I said, we're still analyzing that data from our second randomized controlled trial. But some of our preliminary findings indicate that in addition to the typical gains that we see from people following the peers program, so typical gains are things like just improvements in general social communication skills and social awareness, right? Participants in our dating program specifically said that they were more likely to be involved in dating activity following the program. And that includes, participating in going to speed dating events or singles events, right? And they also went out on more dates following the program. So included both hosted and invited dates. So that shows some reciprocity. They're not only inviting people to dates, they're also being invited. So those are some really promising findings. Anecdotally, what I would say from doing these groups for several years, I was initially a coordinator at the Peers Clinic over 20 years ago and came back as a postdoc and then transitioned to the director of training. So I've been doing this for a while. But what I noticed most after participating in Peers is an increase in confidence. People feel a lot more confident with navigating the dating world. They know how to initiate contact with people when they're online dating. They know how to go up to someone and start a conversation, right? They feel more confident in knowing how to handle conflict in a relationship. So that's the biggest thing that I see. And I think that's hard to quantify in numbers. But I just wanted to mention that I notice this increase in confidence and an increase in confidence from the parents, from the social coaches. They now know how to continue giving their young adults guidance and continue kind of reinforcing the skills that they learn in the program.
Right. And I feel like with that increase in confidence would also be a decrease in anxiety and stress related to navigating relationships in that way.
Absolutely. And hopefully the research that comes out, hopefully we'll have some papers that are coming out soon about Fears for Dating that put that all into writing. But absolutely, I see a lot of that.
This has been such a great conversation. I feel like we've gone over time, but I loved that we did because there's so much great information that you've shared. And it's going to help so many caregivers who are helping their teens and young adults kind of navigate these relationships. And you've also given us a resource that can be really helpful. If listeners are interested in learning more about this topic or looking for support in equipping their teens and young people with understanding, with agency, with self-advocacy, how can they connect with you?
Yeah, absolutely. So I already mentioned the UCLA Peers resources, and I do lead groups at the Peers Clinic. I also am in private practice, and I do a lot of individualized coaching. I do social coaching, dating coaching, and careers coaching for teens and young adults. So the website for my private practice is pediatricneuropsych.com. And they can email me directly I can spell it out for you. And you can also put it, I'm sure you'll put it in.
I will put it in the show notes, but go ahead and spell it out.
Veytsman at pediatricneuropsych.com. So that's EVEYTSMAN at pediatricneuropsych.com. So please do reach out if you have any questions or want any additional information.
Wonderful. Thank you so much for being here. I've waited for this conversation for a year. So I'm so glad to have you on the podcast. And I love the work that you're doing. Thank you for doing it. You're really making a big impact on the lives of so many young people. So thank you.
Thank you so much for having me. I really appreciate being on the show, and I hope this was helpful.
Thank you so much for listening, and be sure to check out the show notes to learn more about this topic and Dr. Veytsman's work. And if this episode sparked reflection, please share it with someone navigating similar questions. Thanks again for listening. Until next time.
Thanks for listening to Diverse Thinking, Different Learning by Child Nexus. For more resources, visit us online at childnexus.com.